Oh no, Exeggutor is going crazy. Look at the chart. Look at the stats. Is this the first super meta in PTCG Pocket? Hello everyone, I'm Leo Wizard. I have recorded all tournaments with over 64 participants and no special rules from February 10th to February 16th. In addition to tracking their appearance rates, I also recorded their rankings and assigned weighted scores based on their placements to quantify their performance in the tournaments. First place gets 4 points, second place gets 3 points, third and fourth place get 2 points, and fifth to eighth place get 1 point. Finally, based on their weighted scores and appearance rates, a standardized composite score is calculated. S tier is a standardized composite score of 0.90 or above. A tier is between 0.7 and 0.89. B tier is between 0.4 and 0.69. C tier is between 0.2 and 0.39. D tier is between 0.1 and 0.19. And E tier is below 0.1. Because Exeggutor performed so dominantly this week, if it were standardized alongside other decks, almost all decks that made it to the top cut would be rated D or E tier. So I used the Windsorizing method to set an upper limit for Exeggutor's performance data, ensuring a more balanced distribution of tiers for other decks. Let's first look at last week's deck usage pie chart. The Exeggutor deck was absolutely terrifying last week with a top cut usage rate of 35%. That's higher than the combined usage rates of all Darkrai decks and Magnezone decks. Darkrai sits in the second tier, showing a significant decline compared to the previous 2 weeks. Magnezone's usage rate saw a slight increase, and with this shift, it seems to be replacing Darkrai as a top contender. Yanmega managed to surpass many veteran decks, securing a spot just below the top 3 monsters. Charizard didn't change much, but Palkia and Gyarados saw a significant drop, now sitting at only 3%. Finally, Articuno and Galade saw a slight increase in appearances this week, though only by 2% and 1% respectively, but at least they made it onto the pie chart. Now let's look at other decks. Because there were so many tournaments last week, quite a few decks made it into the top cut. For example, Pikachu with Pachirisu was back into the chart. Garchomp's top cut combinations are always different, and this time it paired up with Spiritomb. Also, with the decrease in Darkrai decks, some Psychic-type decks got more opportunities to enter the top cut, such as Togekiss and Mismagius. First, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The strongest deck, Exeggutor. Not only does it have the highest usage rate, but its weighted score is also far ahead of the competition. The combined scores of Darkrai, Magnezone, and Yanmega still can't match Exeggutor's score. This shows that Exeggutor not only frequently makes it to the top cut, but also consistently achieves high rankings. This level of dominance is even more exaggerated than Mewtwo or Pikachu in the past. I'm not bragging, but the performance of the Exeggutor deck in the tournament scene highlights the importance of my ranking system. If you only look at data on Limitless, you wouldn't realize how strong Exeggutor really is. You might even think Darkrai Magnezone is still the strongest deck. Limitless tracks overall win rates and usage shares, which include a lot of Swiss round matches, diluting the data from elimination rounds. However, it's clear that the data of elimination round is far more important than Swiss rounds in tournaments. Winning a match in the 4th round is not the same as winning a match in the semifinals. I'm not saying Limitless data isn't important, but if you want to truly understand the true strength of a deck, besides looking at Limitless data, you also need to watch my videos. Maybe going off track a bit, so let's get back to analyzing how strong Exeggutor is. In the 3rd week, players still couldn't find a way to counter Exeggutor effectively. Against other meta decks, Exeggutor generally maintained a win rate of over 50%, except against Charizard. Under this version, Exeggutor's early game pressure is still too strong. To ensure Exeggcute at the first hand and evolve into Exeggutor, most players opt not to include Mew for versatility, instead sticking to 2 sets of Exeggutor and 1 Celebi in their builds. Because tournaments are flooded with Exeggutor decks, Arcanine has made a comeback as a counter. However, even with so many matchups against Exeggutor, its overall win rate is still not ideal, sitting at just over 30%. It seems we'll have to wait for the next expansion pack to find a Pokemon that truly counter Exeggutor. Currently, Exeggutor's strength far surpasses other decks, making it not just an S-tier deck. I'd classify it as SSS tier. Magnezone saw many new deck variations this week, and the diversity was remarkable. Multiple decks successfully made it into the top cut. Although its overall appearance rate was slightly lower than Darkrai, its weighted score was higher, meaning its overall performance has actually surpassed the once dominant Darkrai deck. The fighting-type Magnezone deck emerged last week is still decent, but it is always suppressed by the overpowered Exeggutor. Because of that, it sits at D tier. Until a more powerful frontline Pokemon is found, the fighting-type Magnezone deck will likely remain in the D tier to E tier range. In addition, Magnezone has a stronger new variant, pairing with Steel-type Pokemon. By adding Skarmory and Heatran, the deck's frontline strength is significantly boosted. Skarmory equipped with an item is one of the strongest frontliners in this version. Dealing 50 damage with just 1 energy, it can one-shot Manaphy and Exeggutor in the early game. With 80 HP and a giant cape, it can withstand 2 to 3 hits from Exeggutor. When you think about it, Skarmory is arguably the second best frontline Pokemon after Exeggutor. As for Heatran, it's the best Steel-type tank. With 120 HP, it has the highest HP among non-X Pokemon, second only to Snorlax. When necessary, charging it with energy can also deal decent damage. Aside from its high retreat cost, it has few weaknesses, making it a standout performer. Its overall performance is second only to the top-tier Exeggutor decks, and it has secured first place in multiple tournaments, earning it an A-tier rating. Some players have chosen to forego Heatran in favor of adding Mew to increase versatility against various decks. While this variant isn't as widely accepted as the pure Steel-type build, it has still made it into the top cut multiple times. Beyond the fighting and Steel-type variants, the Greninja Magnezone deck from the first week has reappeared alongside a newly emerging Zapdos Magnezone deck. Both have claimed tournament victories. Other variants include Palkia type, Combi type for enhanced draw power, Ninetales type to counter Exeggutor, and even an Exeggutor type. Yes! If you can't beat them, join them. All of these have successfully made it into the top cut, showcasing the versatility and vitality of Magnezone decks. I'm excited to see what new decks players will bring next week. As for Darkrai, its overall presence has declined significantly compared to its dominance at the start of the A2 format. Only the Greninja, Magnezone, and Weavile variants managed to make it into the top cut this week. Although Darkrai Greninja has the potential to surpass Darkrai Magnezone, it struggles against Exeggutor. With 160 HP, Exeggutor can withstand multiple hits from Greninja and heal back to safety using Erica before its HP drops to dangerous levels, making it a frustrating matchup. This week, Darkrai Greninja only earned a C-tier rating. Darkrai Magnezone remains a very strong deck. In fact, it hasn't changed much from last week, but Exeggutor's dominance makes it seem like it's fallen off. Its overall performance is similar to the Steel-type Magnezone deck, both being top-tier decks that are firmly in the top 3 places, also earning an A-tier rating. Yanmega shined brightly this week, surpassing Charizard, Gyarados, and Palkia in the rankings. Its overall usage rate has climbed to 4th place, and there are 2 main reasons for this, corresponding to its 2 major variants. First, Yanmega can be paired with Exeggutor, using the strongest frontline Pokemon in the format to protect itself. Second, Yanmega's other variant, paired with Dialga, can withstand multiple attacks from Exeggutor, buying time for Yanmega to develop. Looking at matchup data, Yanmega can go toe-to-toe with Exeggutor. However, both variants struggle against Steel-type Magnezone decks that use Skarmory as their frontline, where their win rate drops to just over 30%. Take Dialga, for example. By the time it charges 2 energies on the frontline, Skarmory has already kicked its HP into the danger zone. Against such aggressive strategies, Dialga is simply too slow. Although Dialga decks often include Mew to share the damage, it's still not an easy matchup. These 2 variants are rated D tier. Beyond these 2 mainstream variants, Yanmega is a versatile core that can be paired with different cards. Several decks, such as Greninja, Magnezone, and Skarmory variants, have successfully made it into the top cut. Charizard's appearance rate hasn't changed much from last week. Since the top decks above it are all versatile cores that synergize well with each other, Charizard is essentially competing with multiple decks for a slice of the pie chart, leaving little room for it to rise. I believe Charizard will maintain this ranking for a long time. Although its former nemesis, the fighting-type Magnezone, has seen a significant decline, the newly emerged Steel-type Magnezone is just as much of a counter, with Charizard's win rate against it being a dismal 20%. The reason is that Moltres, as a frontline Pokemon, lacks the ability to counterattack. It takes 3 hits from Skarmory to knock out Moltres, and 3 turns are usually not enough to fully develop Charizard. Because of this, many Charizard decks have started including Dawn to return energy to Moltres and attack the front line. While this is better than doing nothing, Moltres lacks type advantage, and Skarmory's 80 HP means Moltres needs at least 2 hits to take it down. Those 2 hits give Magnezone enough time to charge 2 more energies, summon another Skarmory, or develop Heatran. As a result, Charizard is in a tough spot. That said, as the only mainstream deck that counters Exeggutor, Charizard won't fall off the pie chart entirely, no matter how bad things get. Palkia has also been on a downward trend over the past week. As I mentioned earlier, Skarmory can counter Manaphy, so it's no surprise that Palkia struggles against Steel-type Magnezone, with a win rate of just over 30%. This week, Palkia players experimented with multiple builds to explore its potential. Aside from the Greninja variant introduced in the first week, a Palkia Empoleon combination also made it into the top cut. However, overall, Palkia continues to decline, and even when combining data from all its variants, it only reaches D tier. As Palkia's struggling counterpart, Gyarados isn't doing well either. Even though Druddigon is tanky, it's still passively taking hits. Against a Skarmory with an item, it can only withstand 2 attacks, and 2 turns are rarely enough to fully develop Gyarados. Its win rate is similarly around 30%, and its performance against fighting-type Magnezone is downright disastrous. Like Palkia, it sits at D tier. Last week, I suggested that Gyarados decks could include a big cape to help Magikarp survive an extra turn, but it seems most builds remain unchanged. This is because including 2 sets of Greninja is too cumbersome, leaving no room to include meta counter cards. It might be time for Gyarados to consider dropping Greninja and exploring new builds, such as pairing with Palkia. As one of the few basic Pokemon that can attack with just 1 energy, Palkia has the potential to serve as a frontline Pokemon. Last week, there was actually a Gyarados Palkia deck that made it into the top cut once. By also including Manaphy, this deck can use Palkia as the frontline against aggressive decks while focusing on development against slower decks. I predict that the Gyarados-Palkia combination has great potential. Pachirisu decks, while extreme, are strong in the early game. This gives them a significant advantage against the new Steel-type Magnezone meta, boosting their ranking slightly. There's not much to say about this deck. It relies on extreme consistency to capitalize on the opponent's bad draws. If the opponent bricks, it's an easy win. If not, the matchup is around 40, 60, or 30 to 70 in Pachirisu's favor. If you want to join a tournament without overthinking, Pachirisu is a great choice. Among the E-tier decks, it's relatively strong. Articuno saw a new build this week, replacing one Articuno with Palkia. As I mentioned earlier, Palkia is a great frontline Pokemon since it can attack with just 1 energy. With fewer high HP Pokemon in this format, this deck can reduce the opponent's frontline HP to 20 or below early on. Then use Cyrus to switch in a benched Pokemon and score 3 points in 1 combo. While the sample size is small, it's unclear how strong this build is, but it's definitely fun to play. Like Pachirisu, it sits at E tier. This week, only the original Moltres variant of Infernape made it into the top cut. Although Infernape develops relatively quickly for a 2-stage evolution, it's still slower than Skarmory's aggressive strategies. As a result, despite its decent win rate against Exeggutor, its appearance rate hasn't improved much. Finally, let's talk about the fighting-type decks, Rampardos and Galad. Their builds are essentially the same. A 2-stage core paired with fighting-type support Pokemon like Lucario or Hitmonlee. Both variants had a few decks make it into the top cut. However, in a meta that emphasizes frontline pressure, fighting-type decks don't have much room to shine, so they're at the bottom of E tier. Rampardos performs slightly better than Gallade because its first stage has some combat capability. Besides that, I've compiled some interesting data to share. Although most Limitless tournaments start at night in North America, which isn't ideal for Asian players, Japan still had the most top-cut appearances this week, with 81. Taiwan also did well with 14 appearances, not far behind the second-place United States. As for players, the top 10 is dominated by Japanese players, but one Taiwanese player, Human Mater, made it into the top 3, securing 2 first-place finishes and 1 fourth-place finish. The strongest Japanese player, Lucy, achieved an astonishing 3 first-place finishes, 4 fourth-place finishes, and 1 fifth-place finish. It's truly terrifying. Having participated in a few tournaments myself, I know how grueling it is to play until 2 a.m., so it's hard to imagine how Lucy managed to make it into the top cut so many times. That's all for this week's content. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll continue to provide objective data analysis for everyone. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you next week.